Hey everybody, it's Dana and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be playing with the Hero Arts My Monthly Hero Kit for February 2022. Now this kit is a surrealism design and I absolutely love this kit. So I'm going to show you today how to make a card, but I also had a card on Instagram that was more of a rainbow and I'm going to be working on that tutorial shortly. Okay, let's go ahead and get started making a card. So I have my kit here and I want to grab my mini Misty to go ahead and stamp out some of my elements. Now for today's card, I am going to do some watercoloring. So I have a piece of watercolor paper and this is trimmed down to standard card size. I always keep this size on hand for when I want to start watercoloring and I don't have to normally cut down any paper. This here, I believe was Arch's watercolor paper, or it could have been Strathmore. I think it's Strathmore watercolor paper. And I'm lining up my images on where I want them to be on this panel. Now I'm going to trim this down a little bit later, but I just kind of want to get it centered. Now for today's card, I did want to do a little bit of heat embossing because I am going to be using the Daniel Smith dot water card. I did want to go ahead and heat emboss today to kind of trap in my colors. Once I have the first element down and stuck onto my mini Misty, I'm going to dust this with an anti-static bag. This is going to help my embossing powder not stick everywhere on my card. Now I am using the Embossing and Watermark ink from Hero Arts. Now this paper is textured because it's watercolor paper. So I do want to make sure to stamp this twice. And that's for several reasons. One, because the paper is textured, some of this ink will not get into the grooves of the paper. So making sure to double stamp is going to help you achieve a crisper image. Now, if your ink pad is really juicy, you might be able to skip over this step. But anytime I'm watercoloring and I am doing embossing, I do like to make sure I double stamp just to make sure, because once I start putting on embossing powder, I'm not going to have a chance to go back and correct this. Once I know I have a good crisp image, I'm going to go ahead and bring in my embossing powder. My embossing powder today is a gold embossing powder from Hero Arts, and I will go ahead and gently sprinkle some of this onto this panel. Once I have it on there, I can go ahead and tap off any excess and then go back in very lightly with the embossing powder and kind of fill in any areas. Now, before I heat set this, I want to go ahead and stamp my next image. Now, I could have went ahead and heat set this, but I didn't want my paper to warp too much. So I'm kind of taking a risk here, but I think I'm going to be okay. I'm going to bring in that umbrella now, and I'm going to set that right on top of where this water comes down. So it actually looks like the water's coming from underneath the umbrella. Now I am being very careful not to kind of hit where I already have that embossing powder, but if I do, I'll have an opportunity to add some more embossing powder when I end up adding the embossing powder for the umbrella. Now, again, remember, I'm using that watercolor paper. So I do want to make sure to double stamp this so I get a crisp image. Now, once that's double stamped, I know I'm going to be able to put on my embossing powder and I should have a crisp image. Now, again, if you wanted to, you can go ahead and stamp the first part of this, heat set it, and then stamp the second one. But because I knew the umbrella was going to fall like right in between like the water droplets, I thought I would be safe with doing it this way. I can go ahead and tap off any extra embossing powder. Now at this point, if I see any areas that I need a little bit more embossing powder, this is where I need to do it. Because once I start heat setting this, I don't want to have to worry about there being specks or areas that aren't embossed correctly. So once I have everything done, I can go ahead and move this out of the way and I can go ahead and start heating this. Now I do like to make sure I heat from the front and the back of my image, and this is going to allow me to keep some of that warping at bay. So as you can see, I do some from the front, I do some from the back. Oh, and my heat gun, by the way, is on high this time. So once that's dried back, I'm going to have just a tiny bit of warping, not too bad. Now we can go ahead and start watercoloring this. In this month's kit, I'm so excited to see this gorgeous Daniel Smith dot chart. So this has just a little bit of color that we can use to watercolor with. Now I like to use brushes, but if you don't have these standard brushes, you can also use the water brush, the one that you put the water right in the barrel. I happen to like using regular paint brushes with just a container of wet water. Wet water, of course water is wet, right? Clean water, that's what I meant to say. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to start picking out my colors. Now I did beforehand kind of do a color swatch of the colors I wanted to use, so I know what I'm going to be coming in with. I did want to test something out and see if I can do a little bit of an orange right there on my glass mat. So you see I'm adding some water and I picked one of the reds and I'm gonna go in with the yellow and just pick a little bit of yellow and kind of blend that. I just wanna see if I can create an orange on my glass, but then I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna create it on my image instead. So I add a little bit of water and I'm going to shift things over so it's a little bit easier for me to watercolor. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and zoom in so I can get this a little bit closer so you guys can see the details of me painting this. So first I'm just going to come in and add some water and some color. Now you're going to see I'm going to add the color starting with the red right underneath the umbrella line. Now, if you wanted to, you can do wet on wet. I did not wet my paper first. I just brought the color in. And now I'm just going to drag that color down. I do want to try to get a nice gradient blend between my colors. But if I don't, it's okay because I'm going to add a couple of layers to this. So as you saw, I did add some water. So now I'm kind of doing like the wet on wet technique. And I'll clean off my brush and I'm going to grab in some of that color that I had on my mat. No need to waste that. And what I'm actually going to do is bring that color all the way down. This is just going to give me a little bit of a deeper color palette when I go to add the rest of my colors. You'll see that this red does really not affect anything that I'm coloring. It's just going to kind of give it a deeper like undertone. Now, again, you really won't see this when I add the colors on top, but I wanted to heat set that in first before I went ahead and I started using the other colors. Because if I put the colors directly on top, I'm gonna get mud. So I went ahead and heat set that back. And now I'm going to come in with a little bit of a stronger concentration of the watercolor. Again, I'm starting right underneath that umbrella, pulling that color down. I'll clean off my brush and then I'm going to go into the yellow. I'll start a little bit underneath that red and then pull that yellow up so that my colors are blending and I'm going to be able to get that orange tone I was trying to create on the mat. So as you can see, I'm just going back and forth, blending out that yellow and that red to give me that orange tone. Next, I'm going to come in with a little bit more yellow, just so it's kind of like on its own. So I'll have that nice yellow gradient that's going to go into my next color, which is going to be that green. Now, as you can see, I do like to make sure to go back and forth over these colors because I really want them to blend. I'm trying not to have like really harsh lines on this. So now I have my full strength of my yellow. I'll clean this off and then I'm going to come in with my green. As you can see, every time I come in with a color, I kind of start away from the top color and then I kind of pull that color up. So as you can see, I'm getting a really nice gradient here. So now since I have this locked in, I know the rest of the coloring is going to go okay. Next, I'll come in with the blue. And as you can see, I'm coming away from the green at first, laying down that color, and then kind of pulling it up into that green. And again, this is going to help me get that variation and that color flow between all of my colors. Next, I'll come in with that purple. Now that purple was very, very saturated. I mean, a gorgeous pop of purple. But I need to pull this back just a little bit. So I'm going to keep adding water to this. And that water is going to help me soften that color. Now, if I get too much color or too much water, I can always take a little rag and kind of pull back that water. And I can also kind of tap it with my rag to get most of that moisture away. Now at this point, I was like, let me go ahead and tilt my paper so the water is running down and not up. Because as you can see, I'm kind of losing that blue that I had. But again, I'm going to do this in layers. So I'm going to add some more of that blue, bring that back in, touch it up to that green, and now I have my blue back in. So anytime that I do watercoloring, I like to kind of do it in layers. Like I put down a first wash of color, and then I'll go back in and start layering everything. So let's just consider this to be my first wash of color. Next, I'm going to come in with that gorgeous pink color and fill that in towards the bottom. So now I have my rainbow of water coming from underneath my umbrella. Now again, this is just my first layer. I'm going to build this up. So you see, I stop, I dry, I make sure everything's dry, and then I'm going to keep building this up. So it's going to be maybe about 2 to 3 layers of color until I get to where I like the color and I can kind of lock it in. Now I went ahead and sped this up. Now each time I add a layer, my color is going to get darker. I'm going to get more of a concentration of color. So again, I did this, I want to say I did it 3 times to get the depth of the color I wanted. And what's so great about using these dot charts, there's plenty of watercolor on here for you to create multiple projects. So once I have this color blend done and my rainbow per se is done, I can go ahead and start working on my umbrella. Now for the top of the umbrella, I want to kind of keep it soft at first. So I'm going to add some clean water and I'm going to go into that iridescent gold. And I'm lightly going to put this on. Now when I was putting this on, I did like the softness of this. And that iridescence is absolutely stunning. But then I felt like it was a little bit too washed out. So I'm going to keep adding on some more of that gold just to see if I can get the depth that I want with the gold. But in the long run, I felt I was not going to get the depth that I really wanted on this. So I went ahead and I heat set this. Now, once this was dry, I felt I wanted to darken up that umbrella. So instead of going directly to the umbrella again, not making sure which color I wanted, I use the corner of my paper to kind of test out some of the colors. So as you can see, I'm putting down one color and I'm like, that might work. But I think I really wanted the umbrella to be a little bit more dramatic. So I'm going to come in with a blue shade. Now I'll make sure to list the colors that I use on the dot chart below in the description box. Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and list it over on the blog. So I now know I want to have that blue shade up there. So that's what I'm going to bring into the top. Now remember, I have that underwash of that iridescent gold. So that is going to kind of peek through when I go ahead and paint this. Now I'm coming in with a very strong saturation of the color at first. And then I would go ahead and once I start pulling this over, I'm going to be adding some moisture to that. And now I have an umbrella that I really like because it still has some of that iridescence going on. But I do feel like the umbrella is a little bit more dramatic so it just doesn't get lost in this design. So I like that better. You can really see, I can still see the gold. I do like the dramatic blue color a little bit better. I am going to heat set this. Word of advice, heat setting over embossing powder, be very careful so you do not scorch your embossing powder. All right, I'm going to have this dry. I'm going to set this aside and we'll start working on the rest of our card. Now I didn't want my background to compete. So what I did was I cut down a piece of sand cardstock and I have this new stencil called Star Branches. And I put some pixie spray on the back of it. And now I'm going to place it down over my sand cardstock. using soft brown ink, I just wanted to have a little bit of a pattern on the back of what I was putting down. So by having the brown paper and then the brown ink, I'm going to get some movement in the back of my panel, but it should not really compete with what I'm placing on top. So I'm coming up first with a very light blend of this color. And this is going to give me a really nice backdrop for my card. Now I did trim down the piece that we worked on earlier. I used the Hero Arts Oval Infinity dies. I stamped a sentiment, and I'm going to bring in some of that brown color just around the edges to tap back some of that bright white, almost so it looks a little bit aged. Now, I did feel like I wanted a little bit more difference between these two panels. So I did come back in with that brown ink, but I didn't have my stencil this time. I'm just darkening up those edges. That's going to kind of draw your eye into that watercolor panel that we did without really adding any more design with the stencil. So this is a great way if you already use the stencil, but you just want to add a little bit more depth to it. Remove the stencil and then add in some more ink. And now I like the darker edges, and it's really going to make that centerpiece pop now. Now for my card base, I'm going to use the Hero Arts top folding card bases. These card bases are already done and scored, ready for you to start building up a card. And I'm going to go ahead and use my Hero Arts Precision Glue to go ahead and adhere this down to my card base. You guys hear me say a lot that I like to use a wet medium because this gives me a little bit of wiggle room to make sure I have my panel where it needs to be. Now for my oval piece, I want to pop this up on foam tape. Now I could have totally just glued this down, but I wanted to give a little bit of dimension to this card. So by using a foam tape, that's going to allow me just to lift this panel up just a little bit off the card. Now before I place this on the card, I do like to use a little bit of glue. One more time, this is going to give me just a tad bit of wiggle room. Even with that glue or that foam tape, I'm still going to be able to move that foam tape into place of where I want it before I press down. So I kind of like it where it is. Now I can go ahead and press that down. Then at this point, I'm feeling, this card needs just a little bit something more. I don't want to add gems or anything to this. So instead, I'm just going to grab a brown Copic multi-liner, and I'll do a little bit of faux stitching. Doing the faux stitching as well is going to also bring your eye into the center of where this gorgeous design is. All right, that's going to wrap up the Hero Arts February 2022 My Monthly Hero Kit. Love how this card came out, and I hope it inspired you. I'll see you guys in another video soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.